HOA filed a complaint about my front porch swing, but got cited for their illegal deck. Are you fucking kidding me? Margaret Winslow, the HOA president, stood on my porch, waving a crisp white letter like it was a goddamn sword. I leaned against my front door frame, arms crossed, watching her theatrics. She was seething, eyes bulging, face red like she'd just been forced to drink unsweetened tea. This, she shoved the paper into my chest, is your official notice. Your trashy little porch swing is a violation of HOA aesthetic standards. You have 1 week to remove it, or you'll be fined. I glanced down at the letter, then back at Margaret, barely stifling a smirk. Aesthetic standards. I mused, nodding toward the massive, splintering wooden deck looming over the backyard fence. Her deck. Like those standards. Margaret's lip curled. Don't be a smartass. You know damn well the rules apply to new additions. Oh, so new violations are the only ones that count? Because I'm pretty sure that deck of yours is violating more codes than a bootleg fireworks stand. Her hand twitched. For a second, I thought she might slap me with a letter. Instead, she sneered, leaning in close. Listen, you little shit. You don't run things here. I do. And you, she jabbed a finger at my chest, are going to follow the damn rules, or you'll wish you had. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Margaret, I said, voice steady, I think you might be under the impression that I give a fuck. A sharp gasp came from the sidewalk. A few of my neighbors had stopped to watch. Margaret turned, straightening up, switching to her usual respectable HOA president mode. You see, she announced, waving a hand at me like I was some wild animal. This is what happens when certain people don't respect community guidelines. It starts with a swing, then it turns into cars on the lawn, garbage piling up, and boom, the whole neighborhood goes to shit. I chuckled, stepping forward. Margaret, let's cut the crap. This isn't about a swing. This is about you needing control. You don't like that I don't kiss your ass like the rest of them. Gasps from the peanut gallery. Margaret's eyes darkened. Do you want to fight? Fine. But let me be clear, asshole, you will lose. And with that, she stormed off down my driveway, heels clicking against the pavement, but not before throwing one last threat over her shoulder. You better watch yourself. Margaret wasn't bluffing. The very next morning, a bright yellow HOA violation notice was stapled to my front door like a goddamn eviction order. Unauthorized exterior addition. Failure to remove will result in escalated fines. I ripped it down and barely had time to crumple it before I heard that voice. You're wasting your time. Margaret stood at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, smug as hell. Next to her was her little lapdog, Carl, a weaselly, balding HOA board member who never spoke unless Margaret pulled the strings. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. Margaret, do you have nothing better to do? She smirked. Nothing's more important than maintaining the integrity of this community. Carl nodded like a bobblehead. It's in the bylaws, he mumbled. I stepped forward. Oh, the same bylaws that say HOA board members can't approve their exterior projects without review? Because I don't remember anyone voting on your illegal-ass deck. Margaret's face barely twitched, but Carl shifted uncomfortably. Got you, motherfuckers. Oh, don't start that nonsense. Margaret waved a dismissive hand. This is about your violation. Your ugly little swing. It's a goddamn porch swing, Margaret, not a meth lab. Her face twisted in rage. Remove it. I grinned. No. She sucked in a sharp breath, like I just slapped her across the face. Fine. Do you want to be a smartass? Then, you'll enjoy the daily fines that are about to start adding up. And don't think you'll win an appeal, because I approve all HOA disputes. I stepped even closer, lowering my voice. That deck of yours is not up to code, Margaret. She scoffed, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. You should be careful about throwing around fines, because when the city gets wind of your little backyard project. I smiled. That fine will make mine look like pocket change. Carl gulped. Margaret's lip curled. She had no clue how deep I was already digging. The next week was pure hell. Margaret turned the HOA attack dogs loose. Every day, a new fine. $50. $100, $200, a letter warning of legal action, a formal summons to the next HOA meeting. Neighbors whispered. Some were avoiding me, afraid of getting on Margaret's bad side. But others? They were watching, silent, waiting. Then came the petty bullshit. Trash collection accidentally skipped my house. Lawn care notices appeared on my mailbox, though my grass was perfectly trimmed. And then, the cherry on top, a notice of vehicle violation. My truck, parked in my damn driveway, was suddenly non-compliant. I stormed out, finding Margaret already waiting at the curb, sipping her coffee, smiling like the devil himself. I waved the violation at her. Really? Really? She sighed dramatically. I warned you. I gritted my teeth. She wanted a fight? Oh, she was about to get one. That night, I filed my formal complaint with the city. Every single fucking code her deck violated, documented, submitted, timed perfectly. Because while she was busy trying to break me, I was preparing to burn her whole empire to the ground. I spent the next few nights digging, pulling old HOA records, city permits, anything that smelled like bullshit. And holy hell, did I find some gold. Margaret had been playing this game for years. I wasn't the first person she'd pulled this crap on, but I'd damn well be the last. I started talking to neighbors, quietly. And once I got them talking, oh boy, the floodgates opened. The patterns were undeniable. Margaret wasn't running a homeowners association. She was running a goddamn dictatorship. And I had everything I needed to take her down. Margaret must have sensed something was coming, because she ramped up the bullshit. The HOA meeting notice came with one extra line this time. So we were at the public execution phase now. Perfect. I showed up early, sitting front and center, arms crossed, waiting. The room filled up. More neighbors than usual, even some who never gave a shit about HOA meetings before. Margaret waltzed in, flanked by Carl and 2 other board members. She looked smug. She had no idea what was about to hit her. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, projecting authority. We're here today to discuss a matter of gross noncompliance, a homeowner who has openly and repeatedly defied HOA regulations. She turned to me, the fake smile barely hiding her glee. I just smiled back. Oh, Margaret, I murmured, barely loud enough for her to hear. You're about to have a very bad night. And then, right as she opened her mouth to call the vote, I pulled out my stack of documents. A formal city complaint, a copy of every biased violation she issued, and a report on her deck, scheduled for city inspection the very next morning. Margaret's face drained of color. Margaret was cracking. After that HOA meeting, she knew something was off. She didn't get her usual power trip. No rubber-stamped fines, and no terrified homeowners scrambling to comply. Instead, whispers, stares, a shift in the room she wasn't prepared for. But she wasn't the type to roll over. Oh no. She doubled down. The very next day, a certified letter arrived. I tore it open and, oh, this was rich. Failure to remove unauthorized structure. Fines now total $1,500. Noncompliance will result in legal action. Margaret was betting that I'd break, that I'd cough up the cash, tear down the swing, and fall in line. But what she didn't know, I'd already met with a lawyer. I strolled outside, letting the letter dangle between my fingers as I stared across the street. Sure enough, Margaret was watching from her front window, her sharp little eyes peeking through the curtains. So I did the only logical thing. I waved. Her curtain slammed shut. I grinned. Oh, she was feeling the heat now. And just when she thought she had control, I filed my counterclaim. Oh yeah, baby. This wasn't just about her illegal deck anymore. Every shady little thing she'd done. Now, I am sitting at a legal desk with my name on it. Let's see how she liked playing defense. Things in the neighborhood changed fast. Some people, mostly Margaret's cronies, were still kissing her ass. But the silent majority? They weren't so silent anymore. I started getting knocks on my door. First, it was Sandra. She whispered the whole time, checking over her shoulder like Margaret had goons hiding in the bushes. She did the same thing to me, she admitted. I wanted to repaint my shutters, but she kept denying my request, even though Melissa's house is the same color. Then came John. She fined me $300 for a tool shed. But Carl has one twice the size. Then Emily, the single mom. I had to pay for it and repaint my house twice. But Margaret gets to live in that ugly-ass beige prison unchecked. The anger was spreading. Margaret had kept people afraid for years, weaponizing rules to keep herself at the top. But now, people were talking, and I was handing out copies of my legal complaint like Halloween candy. It wasn't long before others started gathering their evidence. I wasn't the only one with a case now. The HOA wasn't just Margaret's playground anymore. It was a war zone. Margaret panicked. She started calling emergency HOA meetings, ones that were suspiciously unannounced to most homeowners. She began doubling fines on anything she could think of. This was her last stand. She thought if she tightened the leash, people would break, that they'd stop fighting and just let her run the show. But instead, she created an army. One night, Sandra stormed up to my house, fuming. She just fined me $500 because my flower beds aren't regulation size. She practically W the letter at me. I'm done. Good, I said, grinning. Because I need you tomorrow. That's when I made my final move. I went door to door, gathering every pissed-off homeowner who had ever been screwed by Margaret's bullshit power trip. And by the end of the night, we had over 30 homeowners ready to demand her resignation. I barely slept that night. The final battle was here. The meeting hall was packed. Margaret walked in nose high, fake smiling like she hadn't spent the past week trying to crush everyone under her boot. She locked eyes with me. But this time, no smugness, no control, just fear. Because she knew. I had the hammer, and I was about to drop it. The HOA meeting was standing room only. The usual 5 or 6 board members and Margaret's cronies were there, but so was half the damn neighborhood. People weren't just here to watch. They were here for blood. I sat front and center, arms folded, watching Margaret. She had her usual smug, tight-lipped smile, but I could see it now, the question. She knew something was off. She hadn't expected this many people. Margaret cleared her throat, flipping through papers she wasn't reading. This meeting is to address ongoing violations that threaten the integrity of our community. We will begin with. I stood up, loudly. Margaret froze. I think we should talk about your violations first, Margaret. A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. Margaret's eyes twitched. She forced a laugh. Oh, don't be ridiculous. This meeting is about your... Sit down, Margaret. That wasn't me. It was John, standing near the back, arms crossed. Then Sandra. Yeah, let's talk about your damn deck, Margaret. Margaret paled. This isn't. I pulled out a thick-ass manila folder and dropped it on the table in front of me. The thud echoed. This, I said, is a formal complaint filed with the city. And it's not just about me. Gasps. Someone whispered, holy shit. Margaret stiffened. I grinned. You see. I continued, for you've been handing out bullshit fines. Picking and choosing who gets to live here peacefully, and who has to fight, just to plant some flowers. But I started looking deeper. And guess what I found? I pulled out the first paper. Your deck is illegal. Silence. Margaret let out a sharp breath through her nose. That's absurd. I slapped down city records. No permit. No approval. No paperwork. Not even a fucking safety inspection. More gasps. I wasn't done. I pulled out another document. Here's a formal notice from the city. They're sending an inspector to your house tomorrow. If they find violations, which they will, you'll be looking at thousands in fines. And if it's unsafe... I leaned in, voice dropping. They're gonna tear it down. Margaret's mouth opened, closed. Her hands gripped the table. She knew. She was fucked. Margaret's face twitched. This is an attack. I laughed. Laughed. No, Margaret, this is justice. I flipped more pages. Emails. Fines. Approvals she forged. Cases of people she targeted. I turned to the crowd. Margaret has been running this HOA like her personal kingdom. Raising fees, denying approvals, fining people for violations, while letting her friends do whatever the hell they want. But it's over now. Carl, the bored, spineless lapdog, looked like he was about to piss himself. Margaret, he whispered, Is this true? Margaret's head snapped to him. Shut the hell up, Carl. Too late. Because Sandra had stood up now. You fined me for flower beds, but let Melissa install a pond without any approval. Explain that, Margaret. Then Emily, the single mom. I paid thousands to repaint my house because of color standards, but your house has been the same ugly beige since you moved in. Margaret's lip curled, but now she had nowhere to run. Margaret tried to regain control. She raised her hands, shouting over the voices. Everyone just calm the fuck down. This is all. This is a distraction. I held up one more paper. The city has officially opened an investigation into HOA misconduct. Dead silence. Margaret stopped breathing. I let that sink in. Every violation you've issued is being reviewed. Every fine. Every approval. Every misuse of funds. I let my gaze drift over the board. And anyone who helped her. You might want to lawyer up. Carl looked like he was about to vomit. Margaret? She lost it. This is bullshit. I am the HOA. No one was buying it anymore. Sandra crossed her arms. Not after tonight, you're not. I turned to the board. Call the vote. Carl hesitated, then, for the first time in his life, grew a spine. He cleared his throat. Motioned to remove Margaret Winslow as HOA president. The board members exchanged looks. Then one by one, I leaned forward. And now we're tearing it down. Margaret stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. And just like that, the reign of terror was over. Margaret tried to fight it. She lawyered up, tried to argue she had been wrongfully removed. But the city? They weren't playing. Her deck was torn down. She got hit with over $10,000 in fines. Then came the misuse of funds. Turned out, she had been skimming off the top for years. Margaret fled, packed up, put her house up for sale, and disappeared overnight. But the damage was done. Her legacy? A warning. Because after that night, the HOA wasn't the same beast anymore. A few weeks later, I was sitting on my swing, sipping a beer, when Sandra strolled over. You did it. She grinned. You took the bitch down. I toasted my beer. Justice tastes pretty damn good. She smirked. Oh, and guess what? I raised a brow. The new HOA board. She nodded toward the community center. They just made porch swings officially approved. I laughed. After all that, the swing fucking stayed. And Margaret? She was never coming back. Margaret's downfall spread through the neighborhood like a goddamn wildfire. The day after the meeting, I woke up to find her precious deck taped off by city inspectors. That ugly wooden beast that loomed over the backyards for years, marked for destruction. Margaret came outside, hair a mess, screaming at the workers. You can't do this. I'm filing an appeal. A city official cut her off. Ma'am, you're in direct violation of building codes. This isn't optional. Margaret stared, mouth hanging open, as they started ripping the boards off. One by one, the same way she tried to tear this community apart. Sandra stood beside me, arms crossed, smirking. I've been waiting years for this. But oh, the cherry on top, her financial misconduct case finally caught up with her. Turns out, the HOA had been collecting mystery fees for years. Fees that didn't exist on any official record. And where did the money go? Right into Margaret's account. When the city auditors came knocking, Margaret tried to pull the "it's all a mistake" card. But a $40,000 mistake. Yeah, no one was buying that shit. Margaret lawyered up, but it didn't matter. She was done. 2 weeks later, for sale sign in her yard. And just like that, the queen was dethroned. After Margaret disappeared into whatever hellhole she crawled out of, the entire neighborhood changed. People relaxed. And me? I was left alone for the first time since moving in. No more passive-aggressive notices. No more bullshit fines. No more Margaret lurking in her damn window. One evening, I was sitting on my now legal porch swing, enjoying a beer, when Emily, the single mom, walked over. She held up a can. Thought you could use a second one. I cracked it open with a grin. Appreciate it. She nodded toward Margaret's empty house, a smirk playing on her lips. Neighborhood feels lighter. No HOA dictatorship weighing us down, I mused. Who would have thought? She laughed. Who knew all it would take was a porch swing to start a revolution? We clinked cans, and for the first time in months, I exhaled. It was over. The new HOA board was nothing like the old one. For starters, no more power-hungry tyrants. The new president? Sandra. Yeah, that's right. The same woman who Margaret once fined for improper flower bed placement was now running the show. The first thing she did. And the best part? Every single homeowner Margaret ever screwed over got their violations erased. Refunds issued. Apologies given. And Margaret? She was gone. Her house sold quickly, and a new family moved in, completely oblivious to the firestorm that had occurred there. But the rest of us? Oh, we'd never forget. Because Margaret thought she was untouchable. She thought she could run this place forever. But in the end, a single porch swing took her down. And every time I sat in it, rocked back and forth with a beer in hand, I smiled. Because of this swing fucking stayed. And Margaret Winslow? He was never coming back. Some fights, they aren't about the small things. They're about what's right. Margaret thought she was just taking down a swing. She didn't realize she was picking a war she couldn't win. And when the dust settled, the neighborhood was finally free. No more fear. No more bullshit. Just justice. And the next time an HOA president thought about abusing their power, they'd remember what happened to Margaret Winslow.